Okay. Well, welcome to another episode of the Environmental Answers podcast, where we're here to bring you clarity on what's what. Today, we are so lucky to be talking about composting with clarity. I know for a lot of us users, you have actually wrote in some questions telling us that composting is something that you've always been interested in doing, but there's a barrier to it. So we're lucky today to sit down with Sierra Pantlin to give us more information on that. Sierra, would you do us the honor of introducing yourself?
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Sierra. I'm originally from Chicago, but I moved here about 2 years ago and live in Durham currently. I work at Beach Bluff County Park on their agriculture team, and I help run their community composting program. So I'm really excited to talk all about composting today. I've been in the composting world for a few years now, so I'm excited to see it expand.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit more about like your educational background? I know some users are always interested in knowing like what is it that like you have to know in order to do that type of work?
Absolutely. So my educational background is a bit interesting. I went to DePaul University in Chicago. There I majored in environmental studies, and then I got a minor in community service because I was really interested in community aspect of sustainability. And then I also minored in sustainability. When I was in my junior year, I decided that I wanted to pursue my master's degree, and they had the option to do a combined degree program. And so one of the programs that they had was the Sustainable Urban Development Master's Program. So I ended up pursuing that, and I got my master's, completed my degree in 2024. That primarily focused on food systems work, environmental sustainability, community sustainability. Some people go more of the planning route, but I went more of the community route.
That's awesome. So when people hear the word composting, it can be complex. Could you give us your personal definition of what it means to compost?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I feel like it brings up a lot of different feelings regionally too. Like back home, when we would talk about composting, a lot of people didn't want to even engage with it at all because we have a huge rat problem. And so people were really worried about rats getting into their backyards because they're already trying to get into their homes anyway. So they felt like composting would make that a lot worse. When I talk about composting here, I feel like it's a little bit more widely accepted. I talk to a lot of people who are already starting, or there's a lot of intrigue. And it helps that I'm in a more rural part of the county where I work. So we have less issues with rats to worry about. Not to say that it's completely void, but when I think of the definition of composting, it's really turning your food scraps into something new, something usable again. And that is what we call the humus. It's kind of, some people call it hummus. That's not the way you say it.
Humus, got it. Humus, got it.
Yes, the humus, which is just that dark brown material that you see that I love to use in the garden. And that's the most baseline definition of it, is turning your food scraps, things degrading and decomposing, into that really nutrient-rich material. But what it's also really great at is diverting your food scraps from landfills.
And why does that matter? Like, why does it matter if our food scraps, we're using it for a different purpose versus it just going to the landfill?
I feel like we're in an era of consumption, and we have been for a very long time, but it's amplifying more and more. And there's not, with everything, there is not, how there used to be trends where you would have a trend for a while and like everybody knew what trend it was like going on. I feel like those trends go in and out really quickly. And so people are constantly buying new stuff. And that's the food world too. People are buying all kinds of new stuff to start new recipes, and then that stuff goes old and they end up throwing it away. And that just isn't even regarding normal food waste that we have on our day-to-day or that restaurants are producing. And that's taking up space in landfills. It's expensive for our cities because you have to pay taxes towards waste management. The transportation from our food scraps getting to landfills also has an emissions cost to it. And then once those food scraps are in landfills, they can't properly decompose. And so what ends up happening is they create methane. Sorry. Automated lights. And that methane is really bad for the ecosystem. It's a very powerful greenhouse gas. And so just finding ways that we can avoid that as much as possible. I mean, it's the simplest thing of just letting it decompose.
No, that makes sense. I know Something that you said that resonated with me is like the new recipes, right? You'll get something, you'll want to try it. Maybe you saw it on TikTok or Instagram or somewhere, and you'll just be like, oh, I want to try this. And then like you do it wrong, right? And then you end up like burning it. And then like, where does that go? Most likely in your trash can, right? But
Mhm.
like, I guess like one of the things that came in as a question was around like meat versus vegetables going in the trash can and like, or going into the composting bin. And like, what can you actually compost? Can I compost my meat, or is that something that like is different?
That's a really good question because sometimes, so I'll tell a funny story. We did our community composting and we have a rule where we don't compost meat, and I'll tell you why. But we had someone come in and they brought in hot dogs, and we're like, oh no, we
Yeah.
can't compost it. But you technically could compost meat and cheese and processed food, but that's happening on an industrial level because they have the technology for it to get hot enough to kill off all of those pathogens that would be really harmful in your compost versus your like fruit scraps, your eggshells, your coffee grounds, and then the brown material that you have, like recycled paper, egg cartons, things like that. That's able to break down a lot easier. You have less of a risk of pathogens really emerging in there. And you also have less of a risk of it really rotting in there and getting gross and having a bunch of animals and insects infest the area. So yes, you can compost meat and cheese, but you probably want someone professionally to do that for you versus doing it in your backyard.
No, that's helpful and that's clear. Because one of the things is like when you're at home, you're just like cleaning up, like, oh, can this go into compost? No. So typically at the house, it sounds like the answer is focus on your scraps, like, from your vegetables, when you're cutting vegetables, eggshells, you said, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
brown material. So you said paper bags from the grocery store or egg cartons. If you are just tuning in to us live, we are sitting down with Sierra today to talk about composting and getting clarity around that. And so the next thing is, could you talk to us about if I wanted to start today, like I want to start composting today, what are some of the basic things I would need? How do I get started?
That's a really good question. I would say it depends on what your space looks like. So, for example, I live in an apartment and I live on the third floor. I have a balcony. And so, what I was doing prior to the community composting program that I started is I was saving all of my food scraps in my freezer. And then Durham has a really great composting project where you can go and just drop it off. And so I would go once a week and drop off all my scraps through them. Now, if you have the space to compost, then you can look into either building your own bin or purchasing a bin. And since it's new for a lot of people, I would say you don't want to initially build your own bin unless you know you're going to really get into it because it is quite the investment and time and money versus just getting a smaller bin, seeing how much food you accumulate. And what you can start doing is, again, saving those food scraps, freezing them up, because if you add slowly to your compost, you kind of run the risk of more pests versus adding at once. So start off small, save your scraps, create a routine for yourself, and think about how often you want to maintain your compost, because that'll also depend on the size.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I know for those that are in apartments, like having just like a bag, is it like what type of material bag? Is it a special bag you put in the freezer? Is it just like a Ziploc bag? Like, is there a certain way that you store it?
I use what I can, and I tell folks to do that too. Like, you know how Aldi has those paper bags? Sometimes I'll use that. I sometimes people will purchase the compostable bags. That is
Okay.
another one of those things that if you are not composting on an industrial level, it won't compost in our system, so we just can't accept it. But if you are dropping it off somewhere else, then that would work really well, just not for your backyard.
Okay.
You can use old plastic bags and then just dump it out. Just whatever you have on hand. You don't need to buy anything fancy or new, though.
No, that's good. I want to repeat that part. You don't need to buy anything to start composting.
Mhm.
If you live in an area, they still give out like plastic grocery bags. You could start there, or you can use just like anything that you already have is an easy way to just start composting. I wanted to circle back to something that you briefly said. You established a composting program. Could you tell us more about that and what that looks like for you?
Yes, this has been my baby for the past 2 years. I've been really, really excited with how it turns out. So I work at a park that opened last year in March, and one of the goals that they had at Beach Bluff County Park is sustainability. And so we were trying to figure out ways that we could be sustainable. We have renewable energy, we have a localized food system, we have community programming. So there are a lot of different things that we do to try and promote sustainability. But as I mentioned, in Chicago, I worked on a community composting pilot program. This was hired on by the city, and they were trying to see how community composting could expand across the city of Chicago. Community composting essentially is community members just dropping off compost at different sites in their neighborhood, and it's either run by volunteers or an organization. Sometimes they have the more industrial scale ones, but usually community composting refers to like smaller scale composting. And what they were doing in Chicago is they had it at 6 different community gardens. And so myself and a team of evaluators did a research project on the success of the program. It was really cool because we got to do these like service days with them where we would see the compost drop-off days in action. We got to talk to community members and interview them about their experiences in the program, the staff who were hired on to work on the program, the volunteers, and got to learn what worked and what didn't work. So from there, we were able to create a report of recommendations so that the city could eventually move forward. It is harder on a city level, especially with a city as big as Chicago. But I learned a lot from it, and I was like, this is really cool. I also learned a lot about the issues that they had, which was, the accessibility of the lid. If the lid is too heavy and you have a volunteer who can't lift that lid, that's problematic. That creates an issue. If you have odd times and you're not thinking about the parents who are working multiple jobs but still want to compost in their community, or the college student who's busy all day with classes but still wants to compost in their community, if you don't have enough time offerings, that becomes an issue. And so I tried to think of ways that I can make a program here as accessible as possible using that information. And so last August, I launched our community composting program. It is completely volunteer-led, thanks to the help of our community gardeners, and also an organization called North Carolina Community Workforce Solutions. And we have volunteers come each week on our drop-off days. We have a drop-off day on Sunday and Thursday, and they run the stand. And what that looks like is there's information out about composting. They have a scale, they have a bin, they weigh the food scraps that people bring in, and then people are able to submit the form so we can track some data on how much we're getting submissions, and then they add to the compost and maintain it by turning it and adding browns. And it's been awesome. We've got to meet so many people. We have a lot of returning customers. We do competitions where if you donate a certain amount each month, you might win a little bit of a prize. We do programming around it. It's been a really fun time. So.
No, congratulations, Sierra. That's really cool. It's awesome that you're able to bring the knowledge from where you're from to here and then apply it on a scale that is having impact. I know for those who are able to visit your park, they will definitely be able to see the effect of like all the sustainable practices that you all have, but also like knowing that this is an option. So if you're in North Carolina or specifically in Wake County, you can come over to Beach Bluff County Park and drop off your food scraps, which is really nice. So if you're listening to this episode today and you're like, hey, I can start composting, there's a pathway for you to do this in a way that isn't overwhelming. Because I know when you're trying to do something that's new, like composting, for example, if you have only ever thrown it away, but now you have a community. That's the whole point, right? To have a community you can come to, ask questions, and just try a little bit at a time.
Yes, and our volunteers are so awesome too. If they're not sure about something, then they will connect you to me or someone else on staff. But usually they have a lot of insight on composting, and you'll see them build connections. Like a lot of our volunteers will like check in, how is your vacation doing? Like, how are your boys doing in school? Like, blah, blah, blah. So it's really cool to see people connect on a community level too with something that was just a simple project where you bring in food scraps to something that we're learning the names of people, we're seeing park guests regularly. It's been really fun.
No, that's awesome. It's like a way to have continuum points of contact with your community. I know, like, in this post COVID era, we're all figuring out different ways and new normals. And so having that type of routine, is probably really good for a lot of folks. I think about some of our aging population, and they have interest as well. I know that my grandmother, I was dealing with her end of life care, and something that I talked to her about was sustainability and what we do. And so having programs like the one you're establishing is a pathway for them to continue to learn and do new things and it not be not accessible. So that's really awesome. Another question that was listed as something to ask about composting is more so, have you seen it done? I guess this is about globally. Like, do they do this in other countries, or is this something that's just a phenomenon here in the United States?
That's a great question. So when I was doing the composting research back in Chicago, one of the things that they wanted us to do was a literature review. And so we looked at examples of community composting globally. And I would say that at the time when I was doing the literature review, there were a lot of places across the United States that were doing community composting, but there were so many more well-established places internationally. Different parts of Europe and Asia have really strong community composting programs, and a lot of them too in the United States were developed out of need. So during COVID, there was a huge boost of them, which was interesting to see because there's a way that people could engage without interacting directly with one another. And I would say that the concept of community composting isn't necessarily new. Industrial composting is happening. I wouldn't say it's as popular as other waste management or even talked about as much as like recycling. But I think community composting has a lot of potential to grow, and a lot of places are already doing it pretty right.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that that there were a lot of established ones, in other countries. Something that I guess that came up to my mind is like, does it look the same? Are they also doing it at the same scale when it comes to the food scraps?
That's also a very good question. I've seen it so many different ways. So like I've seen it where it's done at a park like ours. I've seen it where that is the organization's focus. That is what they're doing. They have investors who help support community composting. I've seen it where it is a community garden program, and they just have a little lot in the city, and then people come and drop stuff off. I've seen a lot of nonprofits kind of add to their programming and add community composting. So I feel like people really adapted to their needs and what fits best. And I've seen it also where people pay. Ours is completely free. Mm-hmm. But some people will pay a membership fee to participate in community composting, to support the labor that goes along with that. We're lucky enough where we have the resources to not charge people and to make it as accessible as possible. I've also seen it where it's limited participation, which is something that we played around with initially because we weren't sure how interested the public would be.
Like large volume. Yeah, like if you're running it too many people is that what that means by limited participation?
Yeah, if like we had like 50 people dropping off a day, that would make it really hard. Luckily, we don't have that. We do have very loyal donators, but the demand isn't that crazy. So that might vary based on where you are too. In Chicago, some of the sites that they were getting like 20 donations a day during their drop-off times, and they were receiving too many greens. And they weren't able to fulfill the ratio of browns to greens, which is like a 2-to-1 ratio you're looking for. So they dealt with more pest issues.
I think you're going to have to like expand on that part of composting that you brought up, because I had not heard about this 2-to-1 ratio, too many greens. What do you mean?
Yes, so you can have too many foods. You can have too little food scraps. You can have too many food scraps. It is a delicate science, and one that I like to keep as simple as 2-to-1. Some people will really measure everything out. You could use a compost thermometer. You could really get into the science of it if you wanted to. Initially, don't.
Say, level 1, don't start with this. But if you have listened to this much of the podcast, you might want to know a little bit more about the science, I guess, behind it. So you're saying, I guess I just didn't have the appreciation of understanding that, like, I could have too much vegetables and not enough, like you said, substrate, or what was the term that you used?
brown
brown
materials.
material for
Yeah.
like, and that's like how it kind of like decomposes together. It's supposed to be like a balancing act.
It is. Think of them as best friends. So the browns supply the carbon and the greens supply the nitrogen. When
Okay.
you have too many browns in your system, what ends up happening is it's literally just like looking at the ground outside. Like nothing's decomposing. There's not enough moisture in there for there to be microorganisms like moving around throughout it, enough for beneficial insects to be in there moving throughout and decomposing things. It's not a hospitable environment for creating compost. Now, you can have the issue too where you have too many grains. Too many grains, you have too much moisture, which means you're attracting pest, which can lead to like fly infestations. People will come to the compost and they'll be like, should I be seeing flies in my compost? And I think it is a yes, and you're going to see a couple flies. You shouldn't open the lid and a swarm comes out. That is an issue. And that means that you have too many greens in there, that it's too wet. It could be a breeding ground for mosquitoes, which is really nasty, or roaches if you have issues with roaches. So having that delicate balance is really, really important because you avoid issues of smell. Because if you have too many greens in there rotting and there's not enough browns, it's just rotting and it's creating this like nasty, gross odor. You could see like liquid seeping out of the bottom.
Yeah, okay.
It is nasty. So if you have the 2-to-1 ratio, I like to do it where I will just use the same bucket every single time. And I will dump in my greens. Oh, how many buckets of greens did I add? 2 buckets of greens. Okay, I'm going to add 4 buckets of browns then.
Okay.
Wood chips, recycled paper, cardboard. You could do the little egg cartons that are made of paper. Anything like that is really helpful. Another thing that you can add dirt in there, or you can add already established compost in there that's dry. That'll help to kind of balance things out as well. And then you'll naturally see over time microorganisms. Well, you won't see the microorganisms, but you'll see insects throughout your compost. So if you like, we have a little lid that we lift up and we can see all the little worms fall out. So some people will ask, oh, do I need to add worms to it right away? I wouldn't. I mean, unless you're establishing a vermicompost system where things can't come up from the bottom and get into your compost naturally, you're going to see worms eventually. It'll take time, and then you'll have so many. So I think that's the balanced cooking act that you get when you're making your compost.
So there's different types of boxes. There's ones that you're saying that don't have anything at the bottom that's just like maybe on land, and then there's some that are closed.
Yes. So typically you're going to see a earth machine or like a bin. Those are ones that are smaller systems. They're usually like a barrel. They typically don't have a bottom on them. And so they're directly connected to the ground, but they might have a screen on the bottom so that like things could screen through the holes, but it's not fully on the ground. We have a pallet system, and that's your box square system that we made it out of old pallets. Some people will use new wood for it as well. If you're making a pallet system, you just want to make sure that everything you get is pressure treated and not chemically treated, because otherwise you run into the issue of chemicals seeping into your compost and then it becoming unusable. That's really awesome because you can just get pallets from hardware stores that have them left over. You can contact them in advance and say, hey, do you have any extra? Which is nice to have. And you can customize it to the size of your backyard. So if you wanted it to be 1 bin, 2 bin, 3 bin, up to you. And then there are vermicompost systems. Those are the established worm systems where you have typically, they're called red wigglers.
Okay.
And you can use a bin for that. So like one of the bins that we have are one of those like plastic clear tubs from Walmart that has holes drilled in at the bottom. And then another one that's slightly bigger and that kind of seeps out that compost material from the bottom. We put worm bedding in there, which is just like cardboard and material like that, so that the worms feel nice and comfortable and tucked in. And then we add things that they like. With a vermicompost, it's a lot more specific on what can go in there because the worms don't love everything.
Okay. So you don't want to end up with things that will, yeah, I can understand that. You don't want to suffocate them either. And in my mind, you can put too much stuff in there. Right. Okay. Got it.
And they're going to eat, I believe it's twice the size of their body each day.
Wow. Okay.
So they're going to eat a lot, but they're also quite picky. So they're not going to want, like in my compost, some people say don't throw in citrus. I throw in citrus. In my vermicompost, I wouldn't because they're just not going to touch it at all. They don't want any hot peppers, but they love melons. They love fruit. So that is, you just have to be a little bit more particular about what you're putting.
That sounds like a level 3. If you're still listening, this is level. We're going through the levels of composting. Level 1, everyone should be able to put some scraps in their freezer, join a community composting experience. Then this sounds like you're managing it yourself. No, it's really interesting to know. Another question that was listed was about like, when can I use my compost for my garden? So like, how do I know it's able to be used for that?
That's a toughie because it can vary based off of like your family size and how much food scraps you're making and putting into your bin. So for example, like I live with my boyfriend and we don't create that much food scraps. So if we had our own compost bin, it would take, quite a while for things to actually get moving for me to have a usable amount versus like a larger family where you have a baby and things going on, you're feeding your baby fruits and vegetables, that might create some more food waste. And so I would say you're typically going to see usable compost waste within 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
And it's going to be a small amount. I would say enough to spread across a thin bed.
Okay.
It's nothing super crazy. And then once those systems get established and you're constantly inputting food scraps in there, you'll get more waste. If you're doing at home composting though, I would say the goal isn't so that you have an incredible amount of compost to use in your garden, because that is going to be really hard to get to. The goal should be you're just diverting food waste, and you might get some compost from it later on. And then once you kind of get that system established, that's when you'll have a larger amount that you can use in your garden.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for bringing so much clarity around composting. I know for me and many people that'll get the opportunity to watch this episode, we want to first say thank you to you for all the work that you do and the contribution to the Environmental Answers community. Like, honestly, people like you are the reason why we get to like get on here and talk about things that matter to us. So we're very grateful for you and your work. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that came up while you were talking to us about composting that maybe isn't typical, or something that you just want to share in closing?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun talking about composting. I would say definitely look into resources available around you, see where you can donate scraps or even start your own small pile. You'll know that you have beautiful compost when it is dark and rich. We call it black gold because that's what it is. It's so nutrient dense and wonderful for your gardens, and it doesn't have a super strong odor. It'll smell like soil, so you'll know that that's when it's ready. And have fun with it. Play around with making a compost tea where you brine your compost and spray it on your plants in your garden. I know. Play around with chopping things up and putting it into the compost. Really just have fun and experiment. Keep an eye on it. It's nothing too scary. And as long as you maintain that ratio, you'll be completely fine.
All right. No, thank you. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Environmental Answers podcast, where we're bringing you clarity on what's what. Sierra, if there's a way for people to stay in contact, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's a really easy way to connect with me. Just go ahead, search up Sierra Pantlin. Or if you want to find me through Beach Bluff County Park, my email is sierra.pantlin@beachbluff.gov. So.
Thank you. And thank you for all this, you listeners, for listening in today. We really appreciate you. And that's it for today's episode, Composting with Clarity. Thank you again, Sierra. Talk to you all soon. Bye.